Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Chanel Wickenden, to explain how proceedings will work. Chanel, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room, and the results will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start? Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I received apologies from Councillor Simon Bloxham and Councillor Terry Tyler. Having given due notice, Councillor Michael Muir will be substituting for Councillor Bloxham. Are there any further apologies? Councillor Levitt?
Just from Councillor Moody, who's trying to get here, but he's stuck in traffic at present. Thank
you. Minutes. I propose we take as read and approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2023. It's a true record of proceedings. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor McDebenham? Thank you. Any comments on the minutes from the 15th of June 2023? No? Chanel, can we go to the vote, please?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Notice of other business, there's none. Chair's announcements, recording. In accordance with the council policy, this meeting is being recorded. Recording will be available to view on the council's mod.gov website or YouTube page. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. A detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers, supporters and objectors. There's a separate 5-minute time limit allocated to member advocates. A warning will be given at 4 minutes to alert you have 1 minute left. At 5 minutes, you'll be advised that the time allowed has ended and the speaker must cease. Section 4.8.23a. For the purpose of clarification, in order to vote on the agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the, the entirety of the debate and for consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they'll not be able to vote. Public participation. Can I confirm the following registered speakers in attendance? Paul Tate, Councillor Sam Collins, and the lady with you is your moral support, not expecting to speak. Yes, thank you. So let's get to the agenda. Item 6, 23/00590/FP, 93 Nine Springs Way, Hitchin. Melissa Tyler to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. I have no updates and have not received any additional representation since the publication of the report. We'll go to the first slide. So the application site is a semi-detached bungalow The ground levels rise to the rear, and the site is in an area of residential character comprising of semi-detached dwellings and bungalows, and as well as two-storey houses within the settlement of Hitchin. The proposed children's home will operate as such. No more than 2 children aged between 11 and 17 living at the property at any one time. 24-hour care would be provided. A child would have a minimum of 1 carer with them 24 hours per day and a maximum of 3. Most likely there will be 2 members of staff at any one time. These will happen in shift patterns. There are 3 shifts per day. A staffing team consists of 6 carer workers. They will work 2 full days, including sleep shifts, and 1 half day. This means the staff member would work from a morning shift starting until the next day in the afternoon. Therefore, the shift times are staggered, so multiple staffs do not leave and arrive at the same time. Next slide, please. So from this photo, you can see the front of the property looking east, just to show the parking on the front of the house. The off-street parking is for 3 to 4 vehicles that are situated on the drive and front garden. Next slide, please. This is a photo looking the other way, which you can just see a little bit more of the drive along the side of the house. Next slide. So this photo shows the front door, which is the side elevation that faces the neighbouring property. It has been conditioned that a fence be erected along the boundary and the window on this elevation to be obscure glazed to reduce the impact on the neighbouring properties, with details to be agreed. Next slide, please. So this just shows the floor plan. The bungalow has 2 bedrooms at first floor with communal living space at ground floor with additional bedroom and study. As a result of the proposed change of use, no external alterations are proposed other than the obscure glazed windows and a fence between the host property and the neighbouring property of number 91. These elements have been conditioned in light of an approval. If you can go back to the location plan. No technical objections are raised to this development by the relative statutory and non-statutory consultees. Conditions have been recommended if permission is to be granted. Happy to answer any questions or clarifications. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Melissa? Councillor Michael Muir.
I have to declare that I'm a county councillor. So I don't know whether that stops me taking part in the debate. I ask for advice.
In terms of being a county councillor, have you been party to the education aspects of this or anything to do with this property in terms of decision making account? Well, then yes, you're fine to vote because you haven't impeded yourself by doing something at a county level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Councillor Muir. Questions for Melissa at this point? Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, could I ask, as there are no material changes to the exterior of the building, is what we're really being asked to decide on the change of use? Thank you.
Councillor McDebenham.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering if you could tell me the circumstances of the children that would be using this facility.
That wasn't part of the application. It's just for the use. We don't know the circumstances of who the children will be. It's just that they're be kids in care. Don't know what level or situation.
Any further questions for Melissa? Okay, should we go into the register of speakers, please? Paul Tate.
Chair.
just a moment. You just walked in and we've already started. And I've just got to take as advice. It's okay for Councillor Collins to come in. Yes. And Paul Tate is about to talk through his speech. So is it all right for you now, Mr. Tate, to continue? Or would you want a couple of minutes?
It would have been, I'd like to just understand whether Sam will, what part Sam will play in the proceedings. Having not been part of this type of thing before, but thank you for coming. I would just like to understand the process here, please.
So the as far as I understand, Councillor, and tell me if I'm wrong, Councillor Collins is standing in for Councillor Hoskins, who called in this application, brought it to our attention, who is unable to be here today. And Councillor Collins will also have 5 minutes to speak after you have spoken. Right, would you like to begin? You ready?
I will. Yes. Thank you very
Just
much.
a moment, just a moment. Councillor.
I was just going to suggest, would it be appropriate to give, I'm sorry, Paul, 2 minutes with Councillor Collins?
That's what I was wondering.
Just to get
Yeah,
there,
can we?
if they need it. It just seems a bit harsh to.
Yeah. Shall we just give you a couple of minutes to?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Sam.
Yeah, it's just that we can see you're out of bed. Shall we just give you a few minutes? We'll talk amongst ourselves, so you can talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Okay. Shall we resume? Mr. Tate, would you like to speak, please?
My name is Paul. I live at 91 and I'd like to outline the nature of our objections. Firstly, with regard to loss of privacy, yes, as Melissa Tyler has exemplified, there is a window which is contrary to planning permission on the first floor side elevation, and that will be permanently closed. At the moment it's open, and so frosted or not, it doesn't provide any safety or privacy. We're still significantly overlooked. Again, Miss Tyler will be aware of that because she's been to the property and taken photographs. I've also circulated photographs to the councillors, so thank you for accepting those, and they're taken from our garden, and you can see wherever we stand in our garden we are badly overlooked by the dormer windows. In addition, I'd like to talk about noise and disturbance. One of the critical things for us is that within the original application and subsequent documents that the applicant has submitted, there is mention of the children, in contrary to what Melissa has just explained, but there is real ambiguity, and I quote, in the application, the children will be children who have emotional and or behavioural difficulties. In a separate planning statement, the children could have emotional or behavioural difficulties, so the home is to be registered as an EBD home. And in a third response, the applicant states, and again I'm quoting, the children are the same children the neighbour had, but the difference was the children could not live with the parents. The applicant is referring to one of our children who is registered disabled. She has no behavioural or emotional difficulties. That's factually untrue, not an exaggeration, factually untrue. So there is real ambiguity about the type of children who are going to be housed in this care home, and it really is difficult to understand the fact from the fiction. Moving on, amenity. As stated in our objection, we have an extremely vulnerable young person living in our house. The mix of characteristics of two very vulnerable groups being housed so closely together means the change of use application would severely restrict our young person's freedom and mental well-being. It is therefore, respectfully, in our view, in direct contravention of policy D3, open brackets, protecting living conditions, close brackets. The applicant has made no attempt whatsoever to engage with the locality, either before or after. He mentions that we've had a meeting. We have indeed had 2 meetings. It was us who approached the applicant after the change of use application dropped through our letterbox one morning. And since then, there has been no attempt to assuage our concerns or fears. Parking, highway safety and road access. I don't need to go into too much detail because the applicant has submitted plans regarding 3 cars and 6 cars respectively. So I don't think there's any requirement to go any further with that. With regard to adequacy of build, as Melissa Tyler showed, the house is undergoing a rear extension and a dormer extension, and I would respectfully ask councillors, including enforcement, who I've written to and received an auto acknowledgement, but no further contact, that it needs to be looked at. There are some real concerns about the legality and swaying away from what was granted in terms of planning permission. You will see those on the photographs. They are perfectly clear. And I believe Melissa Tyler may wish to comment, but I believe she has also contacted enforcement. She's told me twice. I've contacted them once. We've yet to hear a word from them. To summarise, I'm not here to dispute the fact that children should be housed in local locality.
1 minute left.
Thank you. But our concerns are not based on stereotypes as been accused. My wife has worked for a CLA for 5 years, and our neighbour opposite has worked with SEMH children and continues to do so for 15 years. Our experience is not based on outdated stereotypes, but really because, with respect, we know what's coming. There will be a loss of privacy. Our amenity will be affected. There is some real concerns that we have with regards to the ambiguity, deflection, and falsehoods throughout both the application and summary documents. And we, perhaps as you are utterly confused. Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, thank you,
I was
Chair.
busy writing down, which is why I missed it. Thank you. Points of clarification from members, from councillors for Mr. Tate. First of all, Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for having to half turn around because I can't speak to the microphone otherwise. You mentioned about the overlooking from the dormer window thing, which isn't actually part of this application, already has permission. Did you raise any objections at the time on that one? Just to give me a bit of background.
At the time that the planning permission was submitted for the extension itself? No, absolutely not. It's not common for bungalows in Nine Springs Way to have dormer windows. We have them ourselves. The difference is we would expect reasonably that a family would be living there and not a 24/7 business with carers coming and going, Ofsted, social workers, child services, and potentially emergency services. It's a completely different prospect to a family living in that property, and it changes it materially.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or clarification? Councillor Mason?
Just on the, I've noticed there's a lot of reference to coming and going and whatever on a 24-hour period. And I just wonder where that's coming from, because I guess if it's two children and their carers, I suppose the carers might come and go at some point. But other than that, I'm struggling to see where there's going to be this shift of people any more than a sort of normal family household.
Comments on that, Mr. Tate?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, and with respect, depending on which submission you read, whether it's the original application or supplementary documents, there is sometimes contradictions within the same sentences, let alone statements within different documents the applicant has submitted. As you might imagine, it's not a stable family home. It's not a foster home. It's a paid commercial operation registered with Companies House. And as you might imagine, with 24/7 care, there will be the necessity for carers to come and go throughout the day and indeed the evening. It won't close. It will always be operating.
You may want to pick that up in the debate with Councillor. Questions just for Mr. Tate? Clarification of his statement so far. Okay. Right, thank you, Mr. Tate. Can I go to Councillor Collins, please?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, once again, apologies for lateness, railway company issues. When this application came in, I was thoroughly confused, as was Councillor Hoskins, as was Councillor Bakar, because this is the thinnest and lightest planning application for anything we've ever seen in Highbury Ward in many years. There's no real information in the original application, and I think the planning department had to go back repeatedly and ask for more information. The information that's been forthcoming has been, as we've heard, vague and sometimes misleading and other times contradictory. We see repeatedly in some of the documents available in the pack that you've been issued with and on the website documents that this isn't a commercial business. The applicant insists that this is not a commercial business, but that doesn't make sense. The applicant is an individual on the documentation, but the applicant owns 3 separate profit-making businesses, none of which are registered as a charity, none of which seem to be registered with Ofsted or any of the care and home inspection authorities. It doesn't mean that they are unable to operate a care home, but to say it is not a business is clearly inaccurate. If it were not a business, it would be required to be registered as a charity. That's what you'd see and expect from any other facility for looked after children in Hertfordshire. That's standard practice. And that would change the proposed usage here. And the fact that we don't clearly understand the type of children and the type of operation that's expected in this facility means it's very hard for the planning committee to really determine whether this is an appropriate change of use. Is this a category 2 change or should it be 2A? Well, you don't know because you're unsure of the type of residents that are expected. Elsewhere in the application and the information given by the applicant, they say there will be no visitors to this facility whatsoever. Well, that's laughable because elsewhere in the application, it says it has to be inspected by Ofsted and Herts County Council. Well, that by definition means there must be visitors. Is this going to be more or less than a normal home? Well, it's hard. That's a matter of debate, but clearly you cannot make that assessment based on this documentation. I had hoped the applicant would be here to address some of the concerns because we had 122 residents raise concerns with this application. Fundamentally, having spoken to a lot of those residents, nobody's opposing a facility for looked after children. They need to understand this facility better before they can say, well, this is a good facility or this is inappropriate. I think it's very difficult for the planning committee to consider this application because the information is so scant. Councillor Hoskins put together a very detailed objection, raising a number of critical issues about this application. I do note that that has not been shared directly with the planning committee and has to be found going through the planning documents on the website, and it's not noted in the document information pack that has been shared with the committee. And I think that may be an oversight, but there's some very, very important points raised in that documentation. It would take more than 5 minutes to read through them all, but it details there's covenants on the land. This is clearly a residential area, deeply residential. I think it's one of the most residential areas in Hitchin as a whole. So to apply for a commercial facility on that land that isn't a doctor's surgery, I believe, or a dentist, which are automatically approved, that opens up perhaps other alternatives. If you have a change of use to a commercial facility, what would it mean going forwards? There are question marks about that. There fundamentally isn't enough information here to assess the point made in 4.3.10 in your documentation about the crime and fear of crime, which is a reason for refusal on under the NPPF. Well, how can that be assessed? Because we do not have that information available to us because we've had such contradictory information, such scant information from the applicant. And again, it's very disappointing that they're not here to address these points. I think it's a coincidence that tonight at 9 o'clock, the BBC is airing a 1-hour documentary on the problems of looked after children, particularly in their teenage years in the UK, and how care is currently not fit for purpose. We've seen comments from Herts County Council that actually, because there is an insufficient provision for looked after children in Hertfordshire, the system is open to essentially fairly aggressive applications, taking on dilapidated properties and setting them up as care homes, but really not delivering the service that's required by the people in them. So I would ask the committee to reject this application because it's just insufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Can I just address one thing you said about Councillor Hoskins' information? The assumption is made that the members will actually read all of the comments on the website and that those are read, and that the council advocate will be here with the 5-minute slot to actually say it as well. And I think that is sufficient. Having said that, I'll pass it over to fellow councillors if you've got any questions of clarification. Councillor Peace.
Well, I'd like to assure Councillor Collins that I have read Councillor Hoskins' points on the website, and I share his opinion that it is a shame that the applicant isn't here to address our concerns. I believe that this applicant has another property in Hitchin, and I would like to know, were the applicant here, what issues there have been, if any, around that
I'm sorry,
property.
that's not relevant. No, we can't discuss other
Okay.
properties.
Okay.
No, it's just on this
Okay.
property. Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Yeah, Councillor Collins sort of referred at length at being a business, but I'm not sure of the relevance of that. I mean, much of our social services is provided on a business basis. I might wish it to be different, but it isn't. Most care homes are run by business. Most care homes for elderly people as a business. I'm not sure how relevant that factor is. It's unfortunately the structure we have to our society. I might have it differently. I don't run the world. Also, just to double check, I believe I've read that this will be regulated by Ofsted and Children's Services, because I think there was almost an inference that that wasn't the case, but that was my readings. Unless anybody can tell me otherwise, it's my understanding will be regulated by Ofsted.
That is true. It is regulated by Ofsted and Children's Services.
Thank you.
Would you like to respond, Councillor Collins?
Yeah, as to being regulated by Ofsted and Herts County Council, that's mandatory for any facility for looked after children. So, but it doesn't mean it has been done by this point. If you look in the documentation, it's very clear that Herts County Council is not commenting on the suitability of this facility. It's in your documentation that they are not giving any comment on this. As to the relevance of it being a business or not, I completely echo your sentiments. This should be something that's state run. It's ridiculous that it's not. However, the relevance is that the applicant has gone to some lengths to deny that this is a business, this is a commercial entity, and that's clearly incorrect. And if that is incorrect, what other information in the application is to be questioned?
I think you're making assumptions on somebody else's behalf. Can I just say about the county council that they did feel that it was not for them to actually be involved in the application, but they have very happily provided information about the support they give, etc., which I've no doubt will come to in the debate. Thank you. So that's Councillor Collins. So can I invite the officer to respond to these issues that have been raised? Thank you.
There's just 2 points of clarification I'd like to raise. One is regarding Ofsted, and the process is that they don't get involved until the planning permission has been granted. So that's the system that works. The second point is Councillor Collins raised a query over the use class that was being applied for tonight. The description of development is C2. That's in the description of development. And the definition of C2 from the use classes order is a residential institution, such as use the provision of residential accommodation to care to people in need of care. Councillor Collins referred to, is this possibly a C2A use? C2A is the provision of a secure residential accommodation, including a prison, young offenders institution, detention centre. That is not in the description of development. So I just wanted to clarify tonight, members, that that is not in front of you. It is just a C2 use in front of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I have a proposer, please? Councillor.
Chair, before we go to that, could I ask some further clarification from the officers from something that's come up in what's been said and what you've just said about residential, about classification of uses?
If you'll take that. Yes.
As you say, C2 is residential institutions used for provision of residential accommodation, care to people in need of care, other than within use within Class C, C3 dwelling houses. Class C3 uses a dwelling house, whether or not as a sole main residence, and little b on that says, by not more than 6 residents living together as a single household, including a household where care is provided for residents. Now, the Child Services actually say themselves, modern children's homes are intended to be very much like a family where young people live in a setting as close to family life as possible. In which case, I would have thought category C3 use would have been more appropriate than C2.
C3, if it was a foster home where the adults lived in the property, then that can be classed as C3. Because the adults and carers are not living there, that's not their sole residence, and it has to be C2.
Councillor Daniel Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, during this, there's been comments about the extension that's been done. Is there any relevance to that in what we're looking at now?
In my view, no. In terms of the build quality, that's a building control issue, not a planning issue. And I understand that planning permission has been granted for the actual dormer window previously. So that's not before you tonight, members. Thank you.
So can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Nigel Mason,
Happy to propose support.
Happy to second and reserve my right to speak.
thank you. Shall we go to debate? I'm going to choose Councillor Muir because he's not spoken yet. Councillor Muir.
Thank you. We in Baldock have 2 homes for 11 to 17-year-olds. No problem at all with those. They've been there for 15 to 20 years, both of them. If there was any problems, I would have heard about it and taken some sort of action. As far as I'm concerned, it'd be like a normal family there, 2 adults with 2 kids. So I have no problem in voting for this because everything I've heard is worries by the speaker. And to my mind, we've had no trouble with 2 homes for 11 to 17-year-olds in Baldock. So I have no problem with this application at all.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Levitt.
Chair, just bearing in mind that what we are discussing tonight is purely the change of use from one thing to another. The overlooking everything else, that's got nothing to do with it whatsoever. I think the applicant's actually gone along with offering to do the glazing and do the fence and everything. As we're talking about purely a change of use, we cannot assume, we shouldn't assume that the type of people, the type of children that are moving in there are going to cause antisocial behaviour. Everybody's different. Kids will be kids. They'll be whatever they'll be. I don't think we can judge it on that. So purely on planning grounds, Chair, I see no reasons not to support this.
Thank you. Any other comments in the debate? Should we go to the vote? Sorry, Councillor Muir.
Ask for a couple of other let me see, a couple of other conditions. First, I noticed from the photograph, there needs to be a drop curb in front of those cars parked in front of the premises. So those cars must have bounced over the curb. So can we have a condition that there's a drop curb there?
It's just those cars are to the side, so in the front garden, but there is a drop curb to the drive along the house.
Well, from the photograph, it didn't look as though there's a drop curb.
Can we just bring up the slideshow again?
Yeah,
It'd be the second photo.
okay, fine. That's all right.
Is that okay?
And the other thing is, can we ask for EV charging? We do that on all new builds. And the county council are supplying a lot of their officers that have to travel electric cars now. So really there should be an EV charging point. Can that go as a condition?
Yep, we can put that on.
Fine.
We have got vote in favour with the added condition. Should we go to the? Yes, it's not. You're coming back. You're not on the screen. That's why I don't know.
As he proposed, he's
Oh.
saying that he agrees to the additional.
Oh,
condition.
sorry.
Happy to agree with the condition.
And the seconder?
Very happy to
Thank you.
happy to have that one added on as a standard clause.
Thank you. Okay, should we go to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Chanel. I don't know if you want to go at this point or if you want to stay, you want to go? You have a couple of minutes to go. It is, so don't say it. You're pushing your luck, Councillor Collins. Go ahead. Thank you. Item 7, 23/00/750/FP, land between Durham Way and York Way, Royston Hearts. Melissa Tyler to present, please.
Thanks, Chair. I have received an additional representation since the publication of the report from Historic Environment Team that hadn't commented at the time of writing. I shall read that comment now. The proposed development lies in an area that may have archaeological potential, particularly relating to a significant prehistoric landscape. It also lies relatively close to Ermine Street, Roman Road, the Icknield Way, a prehistoric route way, and Furfield Heath, where prehistoric archaeology of national significance can be found. Roman and medieval archaeology remains have been found within Royston itself, and the proposed development site can be judged to have at least a theoretical potential for Roman remains. I believe that the proposed development is such that it could be regarded as potential to have an impact on heritage assessment assets of archaeological interest, and I recommend that the following provision be made should you be minded to grant consent. 1, the archaeological monitoring of all areas of groundwork associated with the proposed development by including services, trenching, landscaping and ground reduction. Contingency for the archaeological investigation of any remains encountered during the monitoring programme. 3, the analysis of the results of the archaeological work and the production of a report and archive. 4, such other provisions may be necessary to protect the archaeological interest of the site. I believe that these recommendations are both reasonable and necessary to provide properly for the likely archaeological implications of this development proposed. Further believe that these recommendations closely followed the policies included in the National Planning Policy Framework, policies 199 to 205, and the guidance contained in the Historic Environment Planning Practical Guide. In this case, 2 appropriate worded conditions on any planning consent would be sufficient to provide for the level of investigation that this proposal warrants. So I preempted their comment and added 3 conditions that have been added previously to other sites on the gateway. So there are changes now to the conditions. So condition 17 is correct. However, condition 19 and 20 are to be deleted and replaced with the following condition. So, sorry, 18 and 19 will be deleted. So condition 18 wording will change to the following. So condition 17 is the same. Condition 18 will now read, Demolition development shall take place in accordance with the written statement of investigation approved under condition 17. The development shall not be occupied until the site investigation and post-investigation assessment has been completed in accordance with the programme set out in the written statement of investigation approved under condition 17 and the provision made for analysis, publication and dissemination of results and archive deposits have been secured. The reason to safeguard the archaeological record, and then the remaining conditions will be renumbered in light of the deletion of one condition. So they're all my updates. So we could go to the slides. So the site is bordered on 3 sides by a new road network of York Way. The site is generally flat with a slight slope down from south to north, and the site comprises of an unoccupied land currently. The site is allocated as RY9 in the local plan within the Royston Gateway estate. This is made up of a mix of retail, commercial, research and light industrial uses. There are currently 7 completed buildings, including M&S Food, Aldi and Costa. This application seeks full permission for a 1,840 square metre unit, which would be within Class E, Section G2, the research and development of product or processes, and Part 3, any industrial process being a use which can be carried out in any residential area without detriment to the amenity of that area by reason of noise, vibration, smell, fumes, smoke, soot, ash, dust or grit. Also B2 and B8 units with associated service yard, car parking, landscaping and ancillary work. So next slide, please. So just looking at the site, this photo is looking towards the site and where the proposed building will sit in close proximity to the recently completed development, just to the right. Next slide. So the fenced area in this picture denotes the site and looking towards Johnson Maffey in the background, and it's taken from the M&S car park just on the bus stop. Next slide. This photo shows the turn head at the access point with the substation and Costa Coffee opposite by Darlington Road. Next slide. This photo looks towards the A505, showing the roundabout that is just off the slip lane into the employment area, which the access will link onto. Next slide. This is a close-up of that corner where the building will sit, and looking on to the existing industrial units to the south of the site on Orchard Road. Next slide. So the block plan indicates the development layout in context to the other units within the employment area of RY9. You can see the car park of M&S and Aldi opposite, and the industrial units to the south and Costa to the north. Next slide. So the site plan shows a closer look at the site layout with car parking and access for lorries, etc., closest to the highway and slip road to the A505, and the warehouse closest to the neighbouring buildings. Next slide. So this plan illustrates the elevation external finish of the warehouse matching to the other buildings of the employment area. The warehouse unit would be approximately 47 metres by 35 by 9 to the eaves and 11 to the ridge, with a footprint of 1,840 square metres, which includes a mezzanine floor. Next slide, please. So, and finally, the landscaping and boundary treatment plan can be seen here. Again, these are similar to other landscaping plans approved for other units and development on the gateway. The landscape plans have been conditioned to safeguard and enhance the appearance of the completed development and the visual amenity of the locality over 5 years from completion. And that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Melissa. Any questions, clarification from councillors? Councillor Tom Tyson.
Thank you. Melissa, I just got a question about the EV charging point provision, and that's referred to in your report at 4.3.18.
Yeah.
And it's come from the Environmental Protection Officer's recommendation that there should be 10% of the parking spaces to be designated for EVs. So that would be, I guess, 4 spaces out of the 41.
Yeah.
To my mind, that seems in this day and age rather sort of low amount. Is that based on something that is a sort of fairly stringent recommendation or guideline, or can we ask for that to be increased?
So highways also have their own, just trying to find the condition.
Condition 16.
Thank you. Am I reading the wrong? Yeah. more than last time. Yeah, so our environmental health have one guidelines and then highways has another. And I think the 5% meets the traffic local transport plan policies. So that's what's set out in that
Right.
policy.
Well, I thought 10% wasn't enough, and now we've got 5% in the condition. And also,
Yeah.
I point out informative number 1. Well, I
Yeah.
think there's a little typo there which says a charging point. So we've now gone from 4 points.
Oh, yeah, I think
to
that's point
1.
A. Yeah, I can change that.
Yeah. I don't know. Am I alone in thinking that 2 isn't very many out of 40? This is for the staff, presumably, who go to work there.
Should we say that for the debate?
Okay.
Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, just a further clarification on that. Condition 16 actually says 5% of the car parking spaces to have active provision for EV charging, and a further 5% of the car parking spaces to have passive provision for EV charging. I'm assuming that means that 2 of the spaces have actually got the chargers installed, and the rest has just got the wire there to bung it in afterwards. Is what I'm assuming from that. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is something you may want to come back to in the debate. Any other questions? Right. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Michael Muir.
Yes, I would propose acceptance.
Thank you. Councillor Sean Nolan.
I'm happy to second that proposal and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Shall we have the debate? Who would like to speak first? Councillor Daniel Allen.
Now that we're in debate and people seem worried about it, may I suggest that we put in that there be 10% active charging points immediately? And I don't see any need for more than that, because the number of people able to use electric cars is minimal, and the number of or the amount of electricity available to charge cars is also a challenge on an area like that. I don't want to have it like they're having in Stopfold at the moment with fires underground, where they've got too many charging points with not enough power.
Let's start. Should we? First of all, shall we see if that is accepted by the proposer? Oh, so it's going to. I think about it. Thank you. Can we just go back to the proposer before I lose it? Councillor Muir, do you accept that?
Yeah.
And seconded? Yes.
Mm.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
Thank you. On the subject of power, this is a building with a large flat roof. Would we be able to put in any condition to ask the applicant to have solar panels on the roof?
We can ask it, yeah. I think there's, I mean, they obviously didn't put that forward, but I think there are others. Yeah, okay, yeah, we can.
That then goes to another condition.
Yeah, we can put that on. The information to be submitted.
Neater way to do this might be to put an additional condition on requiring for environmental management sort of condition statement. So we can then maybe incorporate solar panels and EV parking in a different condition to make it sort of tie up the loose ends, and then do it as word it is a scheme of change to be agreed. And then rather than us sort of dictating to the because the applicant's not here to ask, I'd feel more comfortable it being a scheme to agree, which then allows the applicant to come in with detail to be agreed, excuse me, by condition. If that's a way forward.
Thank you. Councillor Mule.
Can I ask our planners, whenever anything comes up with a flat roof, one should automatically ask them for solar panels and try and get it at that stage that they agree?
Yeah, sort of an aside, but yes, we make sure that's not lost. Can I come back to you, Councillor Muir? Are you accepting that the condition as suggested by Anne?
Yeah, can you just repeat that for me, because I didn't quite hear all of it.
Will it be, obviously we need to draft it. It would be sort of requiring an environmental management, sort of environmental statement condition to cover EV parking and solar panels, and sort of a scheme covering those issues to be agreed by, by condition. I would have to check the wording. I know there is a piece of work being done by our policy team to make this more formal to sort of cover that. So I think rather than making something off the top of my head tonight, I'd rather liaise with the policy colleagues and get the correct wording. So if need be, we can always pass it back to you, Chair, to agree the wording if you'd rather.
Yes, I'll agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to go with that.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, just again on the same thing, we could always refer to policy NE12 in the local plan about renewable schemes and things, which encourages wording other renewable low carbon energy development, which contribute towards reducing greenhouse gas.
Thank you. That was useful. Any other contributions? So we have got a proposer, we've got a seconder. We have got our condition. Oh yes, and we've got the archaeology condition. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Which is a standard one. Shall we go to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Item 8, 22/00754/FP, the Foundry, Stevenage Road, St Ipolyt's, Hitchin. Tom Ray to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have just a couple of matters for updating for the committee this evening. The first one is, as was mentioned in the report at paragraph 4.4.29 regarding archaeology, the Historic Environment Advisor at the County Council has requested a set of archaeological conditions requiring an archaeological written scheme of investigation prior to the commencement of the development. And this will be in the form of 3 conditions, the usual standard wording. So I'm suggesting that these could be added to the recommendation as conditions 21, 22 and 23. I have consulted with the applicant about this and they're happy for these additional conditions to be added. Secondly, Chair, condition 8 concerning the car parking provision throughout the development. The applicant has requested a slight alteration to the wording of condition 8 to allow the parking spaces to be completed and available on the occupation of each dwelling rather than to the occupation of any dwelling. I consider this request as reasonable, and therefore I would advise that this change be made to condition 8 should the committee be minded to grant planning permission. And finally, the applicant has submitted a unilateral undertaking to provide the financial contribution towards the replacement of the St. Hippolyte's Recreation Ground changing rooms, which I've mentioned in the report. If I could go to the slides. So this is an irregular shaped site of just over half a hectare, located on the south side of Brookend Lane, between the villages of St. Hippolyte's to the east and Gosmore to the west. Until recently, and as shown on this plan, the site contained several industrial buildings of various sizes and a large amount of hard surfacing. Two of the single-story brick buildings remain at the front of the site, and you'll see these on the photographs later on in this presentation. The whole of the site is in the green belt, and St. Hippolyte's Brook runs along the eastern boundary of the site, and the site is within flood zones 2 and 3 of the Environment Agency flood map. There are 2 listed buildings to the northwest of the site, Foundry House and Foundry Cottage. You might just be able to make them out shaded brown there. And also to the northeast of the site, Brookend House and Long Barn, both of them grade 2 listed to the northwest. Next slide, please. So this photo shows the last 2 remaining industrial buildings, which I mentioned just now, located at the front of the site. And this photograph is taken looking down Brookend Lane, looking westwards towards Gosmore. Next slide, please. This slide shows Foundry Cottage, one of the grade 2 listed buildings, and just beyond that, Foundry House. And also this shows Brookend Lane looking eastwards in the St. Hippolyte's direction. Next slide, please. This photo is looking across the frontage of the site. The trees in the background are outside of the application site and will be retained. Next slide, please. This slide or photograph is looking across towards the grade 2 listed church in St. Hippolyte's village, approximately 150 meters away from the site, with the intervening land being agricultural land outside of the application site. Next slide, please. This is looking to the south of the site, across the southern boundary and onto further agricultural land. Next slide, please. This is looking at the eastern boundary of the site where the St. Hippolyte's Brook runs just outside of the application site. Next slide, please. This is looking at the rear of Foundry House, one of the listed buildings with quite a poorly designed flat-roofed 2-story rear extension. The nearest dwelling to this listed building will be plot 1, and we can look at the detail of that in a moment, which will be located alongside the listed building, pretty much on a similar footprint as that red brick building there, which will be demolished. Next slide, please. This is the site frontage, and you'll see just in the middle of the screen there, sort of a hard surfaced area. This was the works that were undertaken to commence the 2018 planning permission and keep that permission as an extant permission. So those were the fairly limited works that were done to implement that permission. As I mentioned in the report, that permission can be completed at any time if the applicant wishes to do so. Next slide, please. This shows Long Barn, which is the grade 2 listed building opposite the site, which is also being converted into a dwelling. And the reason I've shown this slide is because the proposed dwellings will have a very similar appearance in terms of the form, scale, and materials shown on this barn opposite the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the appearance of the site up until its recent clearance of the majority of the industrial buildings. And as you can see from this and see in my report, I consider that the former industrial use had a negative impact on the setting of the nearby listed buildings and the setting of the adjacent conservation area to the east. Next slide, please. So this is the layout of the site. Plots 1 and 3 replicate to a degree the former buildings at the front of the site, and the remaining 4 dwellings replace the other industrial buildings which were located at the back of the site. As mentioned in the report, there will be approximately 11% reduction in footprint compared to the former industrial buildings. A lot less hard surfacing and more landscaping across the site generally. Next slide, please. This drawing shows the approved 2018 scheme, showing the retention of the brick buildings at the front and the siting of larger new dwellings immediately behind them. Next slide, please. This slide shows at the top part of the drawing the existing street scene prior to the demolition of the buildings at the back. And the bottom part of the drawing there shows the proposed street scene with the 3 plots with the access road in between. Next slide, please. This plan shows in the shaded pink there the extent of the former industrial buildings on the site compared and with the new development overlaid that drawing, which shows the reduction in floor space across the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the floor plans and elevations of plot 7, the rear of the site, and all of the garage elevations and plans. Each garage would meet the recommended minimum dimensions in our new parking standards document, which is 7 meters by 3 meters, measured internally, to allow for additional storage, for example, for bike storage. Next slide, please. This slide shows plots 2 and 3 located at the front of the site, and the key traditional features here are the timber cladding, exposed rafter feet detailing at eaves level, conservation style windows, timber boarding, brick plinth, etc. And generally, looking at this drawing here, the amount of window openings and doors are kept to a minimum on the front elevation facing Brookend Lane. With these 2 plots, there will be a need for boardwalks, and these are conditioned in the recommendation to allow for safe exit from the site in the event of any significant flood event. Next slide, please. This shows the plans for plots 5 and 6, and again, these are in a similar design to the frontage dwellings. Next slide, please. This is plot 1 along the site frontage, and a very similar design to Long Barn, which is the barn opposite, which we looked at a moment ago. Next slide, please. And this shows plot 4 at the back of the site with garages attached to one of its elevations. And finally, the next slide, please. Again, this is the layout with fencing detailing shown on this drawing, which will include post and rail fencing, which will be designed to allow for the passage of floodwater through the site should there be a significant flood event. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Questions of clarification for Tom Ray? Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, Tom. I notice there's no EV charging conditions in there that we always put in the residential ones. I couldn't see them in the conditions. Could we add those in, please?
Yes, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem. I think it's condition 19, though, is already in the recommendation.
Oh, yeah.
Is it there? Okay.
Yeah. And that though, don't we, with the specs and that on it?
I'm sorry, what's it?
We usually have a little bit more than that.
There's more information in the informatives at the normally.
Yeah,
but I can ensure that the environmental informative is added.
Yeah. Oh.
Thank you. Councillor Muir.
Oh, thank you. I noticed on the last plan, there was only one tree planted or shown a tree. To me, I know this site very well, and there's an opportunity to have many, many trees planted around that site.
Sorry, I just through you, Chair. There is a detailed landscaping scheme that's been submitted with this application, which does include actually new tree planting. I'm just trying to find the reference to the report, Chair.
What's that? Condition 14. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, the condition 14 is the landscaping plan, but I'm just trying to find the reference to the number of trees. There will be approximately 20 trees planted as part of the landscaping scheme. I've got the plan here, but probably won't be able to see this from that distance, but there are several new trees to be planted around the site.
Could you pass that over to Councillor Muir, please?
I can do that.
I believe you. Thank you anyway.
Thank you. Councillor Nigel Mason.
Given the number of references to flood risk, I was going to suggest perhaps they should plant eucalyptus trees, which are good at clearing swamps. I do have some concerns about I'm not entirely reassured on the flood thing. I mean, I know that area quite well. I've been to that site. In fact, I seem to recall. And when I hear things like having to have boardwalks to allow people, should there be a flood, and this should there be flood, it does seem to me that area is at high risk of flooding. I have some concerns about building. When it's a business, it's bad if it gets flooded. When it's people's houses, it's a lot worse. I suppose I'm still seeking some reassurance on this, because there's an awful lot of reference to it being a flood risk.
Through you, Chair. Yes, indeed, and I do say in the report that it is one of the most significant issues for this development, and the applicant has gone to quite lengthy procedures to cover that issue, and there's quite a comprehensive flood risk assessment. This document, you'll see the thickness of it, but it does come up with a series of mitigation measures to overcome these concerns. And if I could just run through with you what those measures are. Firstly, there has to be a minimum floor level for all of the properties to meet the climate change situation. And plots at the front of the site, plots 2 and 3, which are the nearest plots to the brook, have to have a void system underneath them to allow for a passage of any water in the event of a flood issue. There's also a need for a flood compensation scheme, which basically will deal with, in the event of a flood across the site, the storage of any flood water will occur in the southern area within these gardens, and the detail of that will be secured by a condition. There will also be a flood response plan, and again, that's one of the conditions in the report, to deal with what will happen in emergency evacuation measures and that kind of thing. So there are a number of areas of mitigation there, but we're also expecting the Environment Agency to come back with some additional conditions. Hence, the recommendation in the report is that the planning permission will not be issued until we've resolved the objection from the Environment Agency and added any conditions that they require. I have had several meetings with the Environment Agency, and at the last meeting, we were moving quite closely to a situation where they were offering conditions in the event planning permission will be granted, and they were seeking some further information, which is now being submitted. We've sent that to them, but we're just waiting for their final response. So all the signs are that they will be happy with the scheme as it is now, but we won't be issuing any permission until we've got their comments and any conditions.
Does that answer your question?
I just wanted to come, I mean, I probably should know this, and I don't know if it's within the remit of this committee anyway, but how long, I'm assuming the people who are developing this thing won't be the people living there, and I'm conscious if it floods, it'll be somebody else living there. So how long does a developer have liability for it? So if we give permission, the houses are built there, and in X years' time, they're under 3 foot of water.
I think that's a civil matter, to be honest with you, between the developer and any future prospective purchases. The planning conditions will be there in perpetuity, including the flood response plan and the evacuation plan, etc. But any liability would be a private matter.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm aware it was a slightly random question, but
I would hope it would come up in the searches when you're buying your house. So I said I would hope it would come up in searches when you're buying your house as to the risks to the area. So you'd probably do your due diligence at that point before buying, and hopefully put things in place or ask for things to be put in place. Just another thing in terms of Councillor Muir's question about the trees, paragraph 4.2.4 and paragraph 4.226 cover the landscaping strategy that would be submitted to the council.
Thank you. Councillor Nolan.
Thank you. So in the initial points, I think it's the clarifications at the start of the presentation, you mentioned about the funding being provided for the changing rooms. Is that going to be included as a condition just to ensure it's formally part of the application?
Chair, the funding for that will be secured through a unilateral undertaking, and that's been offered by the applicant. We've received that document now. It's with our legal team for checking, and that will enable the council to collect that funding on behalf of the parish council to give it to them towards that project.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Tom Ray? No. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, happy to propose. I do note the Conservation Officer's remarks about the Foundry House and the impact on those. However, having seen the back of that Foundry House and that horrible extension, actually anything that hides it has got to be an improvement. And as far as the flood risks go, I would say caveat emptor. Anybody doing a proper land search now will find out the flood risk about it before they buy the property. I think it's pretty obviously it's built for a flood risk area. You know, if you buy somewhere like that, it's your choice. You know, people in buying places in Pond Lane and then wondering why their house floods when there wasn't a pond in Pond Lane and their house was built on the only bit of space. It is quite a good example. So happy to move the recommendation.
With your proposal. And Councillor Muir.
I'm happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you. Debate. Councillor Levitt.
Just a thought, as this is in Greenbelt, but it does still have to go to the Secretary of State, doesn't it, for comment?
No, because it meets one of the exceptions of Greenbelt policy. So,
any other comments? Councillor Allen.
Seeing as there's already the permission for 5 houses, I can't see there is much point arguing from it going from 5 to 7, so I will support it. But if I'd been there previously, I'm not sure how I would have done, bearing in mind the flood risk.
Shall we go to the vote?
With the additional conditions.
With the vote with the additional conditions.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Planning appeals.
Thank you, Chair. On page 77, there's an information item regarding the solar farm that's been called in. Unfortunately, in the papers, the appendices got loaded before the clarification statement, so that's probably why it loaded backwards. But the clarification statement on page 77 is just to let you all know that the Secretary of State has decided to call in the solar farm application. It was obviously before you last year. A public inquiry date of the 12th of September has been identified. They're indicating 8 days for the public inquiry, although that will be confirmed depending on whether there's any Rule 6 parties. And the Sean Greaves is currently sort of progressing the paperwork side of things, but it's still in the early stages of yet appointing barristers and consultants and things like that. But it's for information that we have now had this notification. Thank you.
Councillor Levitt.
I'm assuming the public inquiry will be held here. Oh, thank you.
Can I ask, is this public knowledge yet?
I believe so, yes. It's public knowledge now, obviously.
I just wondered if this was it. So the report is for noting only. Yes?
Yes, sorry.
So that is the end of the meeting. I close the meeting at 20:56. Our next meeting is on the 27th of July. Right, thank you very much.